Dennis Bowman, 72, pleaded no contest Wednesday in an Allegan County courtroom to killing his 14-year-old adopted daughter Aundria Bowman more than 30 years ago. Aundria's body, missing since March 1989, was uncovered in the backyard of Bowman's Hamilton home in early 2020. Bowman was charged with her murder later that year. Wednesday, Bowman pleaded no contest to second-degree murder, which carries a maximum sentence of life in prison, ahead of a jury trial that had been set for early January. A no-contest plea, while not an admission of guilt, has the same effect as a guilty plea would in terms of sentencing. Bowman is already serving 2 life sentences for the 1980 rape and murder of a 25-year-old woman in Norfolk, Virginia, a case that had gone cold for decades until Bowman's 2019 arrest. On March 11, 1989, Bowman returned to the home south of Holland where he and his wife Brenda lived to find Aundria packing a bag to run away, according to his statements to police. Aundria threatened to report that Bowman had sexually assaulted her, the two argued, and Bowman punched her, knocking her down a set of stairs, according to the facts of the case recited during Wednesday's hearing. In the fall, Aundria broke her neck. Bowman then took her body out to a barn, burned her clothes and bag and left her under a tarp. That day, he called police to report Aundria had stolen $100 from the couple and run away from home. Later, he used an axe to cut off her legs so her body would fit in a barrel that he buried and then reburied at their new home in Hamilton when they moved. "I have confessed to the death of Aundria," Bowman wrote in a confession letter dated November 7, 2019, "I myself and no one else. In an argument with her, I struck her, which made her stagger backwards and fall headfirst down a steep staircase in the house we rented between Holland and Hamilton. Fearing more prison time and losing my loved ones, I hid the body and then disposed of it days later. I have kept it to myself these many years so I could live with Brenda and watch Vanessa grow into a successful young lady. Please, with all love, I ask you to support Brenda because I have caused her hurt and left her desolate." Bowman confessed to concealing Aundria's death while he was being held in the Allegan County Jail after his arrest for the Norfolk, Virginia, murder. In a recorded phone call to his wife from the jail, he told Brenda where on their property Aundria was buried and admitted her death was his fault. The couple adopted Aundria, born Alexis Badger, as an infant. Birth mother Kathy Turkanian had Alexis when she was a teenager and gave her up for adoption in the state of Virginia. Turkanian was involved in the hunt for Aundria's body and became convinced years before his arrest that Bowman was responsible for her death after learning that Bowman had a history of assaulting women. Police say he was responsible for the 1979 rape of a 27-year-old woman, the 1980 attempted rape of a 19-year-old woman and the 1989 kidnapping and sexual assault of a 6-year-old girl near Holland. Allegan County Prosecutor Myrene Koch planned to call several of the victims of these crimes to testify at trial. A childhood friend to whom Aundria had reported Bowman was molesting her was also on the prosecution's witness list. On Saturday, September 16, 1972, a grisly discovery was made when the trunk of a vehicle belonging to 19-year-old Indiana State University sophomore Pamela Milam was opened. The young co-ed had planned on spending the weekend on campus to attend some scheduled Sigma Kappa sorority events but had gone missing on the Friday night. While she commuted to school each day, she was expected to stay at one of the rooms the sorority had on campus. Pam had left her sorority sisters on Friday night to move her car closer to the dorm, promising to be back in a few minutes. She never returned and missed her 8 a.m. shift she was scheduled to work the following day at the library. After she was reported missing, Pam's father and sister spent the day searching the campus for the missing student. Pam's 1964 Pontiac Lemons was located parked at the campus around 7 p.m. Saturday night by 2 of her sorority sisters. Her glasses were seen through the rear window of the car and her purse was in the back seat. Pamela's father arrived with a spare set of keys, and when the trunk of her car was opened, Pam was found dead inside. She had been bound with clothesline and her mouth was gagged. Pam's body was bruised and she had wounds on her head and face. An autopsy was conducted by coroner Dr. Robert Blake and the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. No witnesses to the murder of Pamela were found, nor were there any descriptions of who may have been responsible for her death. Authorities were tasked with trying to find who killed the young co-ed on the night of September 15. Police suspected that the person responsible for Pamela's death might very well be Robert Wayne Austin. He had been arrested after a series of abductions and abduction attempts of students on the campus 7 weeks after Pamela's murder. Austin would sexually assault his abductees and return them to the Indiana State campus. Austin would eventually be convicted of rape, sodomy, and kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison. He denied having any connection to the Milam murder, and police were never able to uncover concrete evidence to connect him to the crime. With no new information, the case would go cold and remain so for decades. Indiana State Police would reopen the investigation in 2001, analyzing a stain on Milam's clothing to try once again to connect Austin to the murder using DNA evidence. Instead of connecting him to Pam's murder, they would eliminate him as a suspect as the DNA profile created did not match Austin. Investigators would also use new technology to analyze a fingerprint located on Pamela's glasses as well as those located on the door of Pamela's car. Those prints did not match Austin either, or any of those stored in the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS. The profile generated from the DNA sample was entered into the FBI's CODIS database but didn't trigger a match to any known offender. Terre Haute Police Chief Sean Keane reopened the case in 2008 looking for further DNA evidence, and the 56 males named in the files kept for the cold case. The clothesline used to bind Milam provided a partial profile using touch DNA that established a single male suspect when reference to the profile created from the stain on Pamela's blouse. Despite new efforts to locate Pamela's killer, the case remained cold until 2018 when the DNA samples were compared to those submitted to genealogy websites and services hoping for a hit from samples stored from customers. Keane had attempted to do the same in 2009, but his request was denied due to Indiana state laws at the time. When familial testing or forensic genealogy became a legal investigation tool, Keane teamed with Parabon Nanolabs Inc. to compare the DNA profile with those collected by genealogy websites and companies. For decades after Pamela's murder, the authorities finally received a hit. The family tree of the hit was investigated and further DNA samples were analyzed. Jeffrey Lynn Hand was identified as the killer. DNA samples from Hand's widow and his 2 sons helped link him to the stain found on Milam's blouse. The probability of the DNA match was determined to be 99.9999%. Hand would have been 23 years old at the time of Pam's murder. While the exact circumstances of how the two crossed paths is unknown, Chief Keane believes it was completely random as Hand had not been enrolled at Indiana State and worked as a delivery man for a record company. Hand had previously been arrested in 1973 for picking up a couple who had been hitchhiking and murdering the husband. The Evansville woman was able to escape, but police found the husband dead, having been stabbed and shot in the head. During the trial, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity and released from prison in 1976. Hand was killed by police in 1978 while attempting to abduct a woman at the Markland Mall in Kokomo, located about 130 miles northeast of where Milam was killed. The kidnapping attempt was witnessed by an off-duty sheriff's deputy who intervened to stop the abduction. Hand shot the deputy twice before being shot and killed by a city officer who was on the scene. All the evidence was reviewed by Vigo County Chief Deputy Rob Roberts and Chief Keane. The two are in agreement that were Hand still alive today, there would be sufficient forensic evidence to bring him to trial and convict him for the murder of Pamela Milam. After 47 years, Milam's family finally has closure knowing the identity and the fate of the person responsible for the death of their loved one. Police have made an arrest in a cold case murder of a missing 8-year-old who was found dead near his Roswell home over 30 years ago. On May 15, 1988, police say 8-year-old Joshua Harmon was reported missing by his parents when he didn't come home for dinner. 2 days later, his body was found in the woods near the Raintree Way apartment complex where he lived. The man accused of molesting and murdering 8-year-old Joshua Harmon in 1988 pleaded not guilty to the charges at a February 24 hearing, waiving his right to a formal arraignment. The suspect, James Michael Coates, 56, of Woodstock, asked to be released on bond not to exceed $10,000, but that request was denied. The Roswell Police Department arrested and charged Coates during a traffic stop last summer shortly after detectives allegedly linked DNA evidence from Coates to the scene of the murder more than 30 years ago. Coates faces 8 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of aggravated child molestation, murder, aggravated sodomy, enticing a child for indecent purposes, false imprisonment, cruelty to children in the first degree, concealing the death of another and tampering with evidence, according to court records. Coates' attorney, Catherine Roch, argued he should be granted bond by highlighting his ties to the community. Roch said that when Coates was arrested in July, he was still living in Woodstock with his parents and older brother, decades after the murder had occurred, and was working at a local Burger King. "Your Honor, he is not a flight risk," Roch said. He was interviewed as a suspect in this case over 20 years ago in 1998, and he remained in the greater Atlanta area. He did not run, he did not flee, he did not skip town. Roch said Coates received his GED in Chesterton, Indiana, and went on to earn 3 medical technical degrees from the Illinois Medical Training Center before he moved to Atlanta in 1985. 3 years later, Harmon's body was discovered in a wooded area 100 yards from both his and Coates' Roswell apartment complex. Harmon had been reported missing 2 days prior. Roswell police identified Coates as a suspect in 1998 after taking a blood sample while he was serving 20 years on a 1993 conviction for child molestation. Fulton County Chief Senior Assistant District Attorney Chinook Occam said the molestation case for which Coates was convicted in 1993 had similarities to the Harmon murder. In both cases, Occam said, the victims were 8-year-old white boys who had been lured into the woods. But in the 1993 case, the victim managed to escape, report the incident and identify Coates as his offender in a lineup. The fact that he doesn't have a lengthy criminal history is not indicative of this case, because he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, Occam said. So, because of the length of the time that he was in prison, he did not have the opportunity to commit a crime because he was locked up in the Department of Corrections. While Coates maintains his innocence on the child molestation conviction, Roch said he agreed to register as a sex offender in 2014. She added that Coates had not committed any other felonies since his 1993 conviction. But, Occam pointed out, Coates also pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor battery/family violence charge against someone who was 65 years or older in 2019. It wasn't until December 2020 that Coates met with law enforcement again. At that time, Roch said, Roswell police asked for another sample of his DNA, which Coates agreed to by going to the police station himself, giving them what they needed, then heading off to work. Roch alleged that the reason Roswell police asked for the new sample is because the Georgia Bureau of Investigation lost Harmon's 1988 sexual assault kit and was unable to compare it to Coates' 1998 blood sample. However, Roch said, the GBI suddenly found the kit in 2012 and finally examined it in 2014. Out of 4 samples taken from the kit, Roch said the GBI concluded that 2 contained Harmon's DNA. The 3rd sample did not have enough evidence to run a test, and the 4th could not be successfully examined. The case was revived in 2015 when Roswell police received funding for more exacting DNA testing. Authorities sent the 1988 samples to Cybergenetics Incorporated, an independent laboratory in San Diego, California. Roswell police said those results were what allegedly linked Coates to the crime. But at Thursday's hearing, Roch said the lab determined that the likelihood of the DNA belonging to Coates was 1 in 67,000. This is the state's case, Roch said. Your Honor, I firmly believe, having taken a look at the voluminous evidence that the state has provided to us so far, that Mr. Coates did not commit this crime and that the state cannot prove that he committed this crime without a reasonable doubt. Occam said it was up to the jury to decide whether there was enough evidence to convict Coates, adding that due to the gruesomeness of the case and similarity to his 1993 conviction, Coates should absolutely be denied bond. Fulton County Superior Court Judge Jane Barwick agreed, saying the defendant's flight risk was greater than ever. Barwick said that while Coates had allegedly complied with registering as a sex offender, he continued to be close to children by working at Burger King. I think Burger King is a fine place to work and a fine institution, Barwick said, but it certainly involves a lot of exposure to children and perhaps a playground, and so I was distressed by that. The morning of June 1, 1989, was fairly normal for Stephanie Isaacson. The 14-year-old woke up, got dressed, packed her school bag and set out at about 6:30 a.m. for a walk to her Las Vegas high school, taking her usual shortcut through an empty sandlot. But she never made it beyond her detour. Investigators found Isaacson dead and bludgeoned by the sandlot. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled, police said. For 32 years, the case remained cold, despite failed attempts at matching the DNA found on Isaacson's shirt. That is, until 9 months ago, when a Texas lab offered to process a cold case with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department using new technology. The test would be free, thanks to a donation from an anonymous benefactor. In January 2021, police sent the lab the remaining DNA from Isaacson's case, the equivalent of 15 human cells. The police department announced it had successfully identified the suspect using the technology, setting a record for the least amount of DNA used to solve a case. Police identified the killer as Darren R. Marchand. But there would be no arrest. Marchand died by suicide in 1995 at 29 years old. "I'm glad they found who murdered my daughter," Isaacson's mother, who was not named, wrote in a statement read Wednesday by LVMPD Lieutenant Ray Spencer at a news conference. "I never believed the case would be solved." Genome sequencing and genetic genealogy, the processes used to help identify Marchand, have assisted in successfully solving dozens of cold cases in recent years. The most high-profile was the 2018 identification of the Golden State Killer, who killed 12 people and raped 45 women across California between 1976 and 1986. In April 2019, investigators successfully employed the technology to solve the brutal 1972 murder of a 20-year-old woman in Washington state. The killer died by suicide in November before sentencing. And in March, Colorado investigators arrested a man who allegedly kidnapped, assaulted and murdered 2 women in 1982. The case is ongoing. Isaacson's case goes back decades. On the morning of June 1, 1989, the 14-year-old used her usual shortcut to get to El Dorado High School, police said. Isaacson's father grew concerned when she did not come home that afternoon. He contacted school officials to find out if they knew where his daughter was, but they said she wasn't at school that day, according to police. He then called Isaacson's friends, who also said they didn't see her that day. Soon after, Isaacson's father called police and reported her missing. What followed was an aggressive air and ground search, law enforcement said. At about 8:40 p.m., investigators spotted several of Isaacson's school books and belongings in a desert area near her home, police said. Search parties then began scoping out the area. They found the girl's body about 25 yards off the trail she normally took while walking to school. An autopsy found that Isaacson had significant blunt force trauma injuries and that she had been sexually assaulted, Spencer, the lieutenant with LVMPD, said at the news conference. The Clark County Coroner's Office noted she died of strangulation. In the years since Isaacson's death, police said they identified several suspects. Investigators traveled to Washington State, Ohio and Texas to follow up on leads. In 1998, the department's forensic laboratory attempted to test the evidence for DNA using now obsolete technology. It was unsuccessful, according to Kim Murga, the lab's director. It tried again in 2007 and successfully obtained a DNA profile from semen found on Isaacson's shirt. The team uploaded the DNA profile into an FBI database but never received a match. November 2020, Othram, a genome sequencing lab specializing in assisting with cold cases, reached out to Murga's team and offered its services using its new technology. Someone had donated money to the lab specifically to help solve one cold case with the LVMPD. Stephanie's case was chosen specifically because of the minimal amount of DNA evidence that was available, Spencer said. Over the course of 7 months, Othram worked to build a genetic profile from the DNA. The Othram genealogy team used the profile to develop investigative leads that were returned to LVMPD, the Houston-based company said in a news release. Marchand had a criminal history in the Las Vegas area, Spencer said. He was arrested in 1986 at the age of 20 and charged with fatally strangling 24-year-old Nanette Vanderberg in her home. The case was ultimately dismissed for lack of evidence. Marchand killed himself 9 years later. DNA testing was not available when Vanderberg was killed, but police compared the DNA from her case with that found in Isaacson's case. It was a match, according to an LVMPD news release. There is no way to know if Marchand knew Isaacson. It appears to be a random attack while she was walking to school, Spencer said. Although the police department has finally solved Isaacson's case, her family is grappling with how to move on when no criminal action can be taken against the man responsible. It's good to have some closure, but there is no justice for Stephanie at all, Isaacson's mother wrote in her statement. We will never have complete closure because nothing will ever bring my daughter back to us. After a 41-year investigation, Newport Beach police have identified the person responsible for the brutal murder of Judy Nesbitt. Kenneth Elwyn Marks was positively identified in the murder of Judith Judy Conklin Nesbitt through the use of genealogical DNA, Newport Beach police said Monday in a statement. Though Marks died in 1999, police say he was never identified as a suspect in her murder while he was alive. It was Wednesday before Thanksgiving weekend in 1980 when Nesbitt, a mother of 4, arrived in Newport Beach. She was to show the family's 36-foot cabin cruiser, the Felicidad 4, to a potential buyer, according to Newport Beach police spokeswoman Heather Rangel. Police said that at approximately 1 p.m. that day, the man, now known to be Kenneth Marks, followed Judy into the sleeping quarters of the boat and accosted her, Rangel said. After a violent struggle, Marks shot Judy in the head and stole her credit cards, checkbook and cash from her purse before fleeing the scene. Though he died in California, he was buried in Bridgeport, Texas, leaving behind his father, brothers, sisters, and the unsolved murder of Judy Nesbitt. Generations of Newport Beach police officers were intent on finding the person responsible for her violent death. With the advent of DNA profiling, Newport Beach police kept pursuing leads in Nesbitt's murder. In 2002, investigators were able to create a limited DNA profile based upon the roots of the hairs, Rangel explained. Researchers entered the DNA profile into the FBI's CODIS system. For nearly 20 years, that sample was unmatched. In 2018, Newport Beach police went to work with experts to further expand the DNA profile with remaining evidence, hair roots pulled from the suspect that remained in limbo since 1980. Green Laboratories was able to make a more expansive DNA profile based upon hair shaft DNA, something that hadn't been attempted before. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore was able to extract the familial DNA and, after a time and thorough genetic genealogy research, identified Marks as the killer in this case. This was the first time that DNA collection strategy had been used in a criminal investigation in the United States, according to Rangel. Newport Beach police arrived at the home of the Nesbitt family, letting them know that the genealogical DNA search was over. Judy's murder was solved, according to Police Chief John T. Lewis. He spoke on the dramatic turn of events in the cold case that has hung heavy in the hearts of our community, our department, and the Nesbitt family since the 1980s. Kenneth Marks has passed away, but he no longer gets to hold the secret of his deeds, Lewis said in a prepared statement. Through incredible advances in technology and the tireless dedication of these investigators, we now have some closure for all who knew and loved Judy Nesbitt. The Newport Beach Police Department thanked numerous law enforcement partners, the Orange County District Attorney's Office, the Orange County Crime Lab, the Texas Rangers Department of Public Safety, and the Wise County Sheriff's Department for their assistance and commitment to this investigation. Additionally, they thanked non-government organizations for their commitment and assistance: Green Laboratories, Austria Forensics, Family Tree DNA, Verogen, Bode Technologies, and the University of North Texas. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe and like the video, and click the bell icon to stay tuned.